about Tee Higgins, the first selection off the board in the second round out of Clemson. And the Bengals took a wide receiver, I think to some people's surprise. But what are your thoughts here for Higgins? Any winners and losers in this move? And do you expect him to be somebody that we're looking at in 2020 redraft?
Yeah, here's the thing. I think Higgins was a great move for the Bengals. They give Burrow a young wide receiver to grow with. We know A.J. Green has missed a lot of games. He's actually missed 23 games in the last 2 seasons. He's going to be 32 this year. So I think giving Joe Burrow, A.J. Green, Tyler Boyd, and now Tee Higgins, I mean, even John Ross, if you want to count him, to grow with, it is a great receiving core. That's a great unit to come into the league with. But as A.J. Green moves on, I think Tee Higgins is going to be a playmaker. In redraft, I'm honestly not super interested in him. I just named off a lot of guys in that offense that are going to be competing for targets, competing for touches. They have Joe Mixon as well, who's a top 10 running back for me in redraft this season. So, in redraft leagues, I just don't know that the volume's going to be there for Higgins. He is a big play guy. He averaged 19.8 yards per catch in his final year at Clemson. He's big. He's 6'4", 216. He has a knack for getting open downfield. So I think he will definitely have some games where he breaks a big one and he's startable, but it's just going to be too hard to predict and it might be a little bit inconsistent. So for me, I love Higgins as a talent, but in redraft, I'm probably trying to stay away other than a late bench stash, kind of counting on A.J. Green going down at some point.
Yeah, we got some injury-riddled guys in A.J. Green and John Ross there. I mean, you threw out the measurables, 6'4", 216. Isn't that what A.J. Green was? So I kind of see Higgins going into that role later on. I know Zach Taylor and the Bengals staff have come out and said, this isn't our A.J. Green replacement. If you look at the move, though, it does kind of seem like it. What are your thoughts on it, Mike?
This was one of my favorite landing spots from a dynasty perspective. I think you're right on redraft. I mean, just in general, you don't really want to invest in rookie wide receivers in redraft because even like last year when we had a very historic performance from that class, a lot of those guys you can grab on waivers. And you just like the in the redrafts that I do play, those spots, roster spots in the beginning of the season are just too important to kind of hold rookie wide receivers. But like you said, it's a great landing spot. I don't think he's going to take over A.J. Green. I think anyone that gets held to that type of standard is going to disappoint. When I watch Tee Higgins, what I see is a Alshon Jeffrey. He's someone that's really good on the sidelines, very good in contested catch, just a tall, lanky guy that's not like blazing, but he will beat you deep if you give him the chance. And that's kind of what I see in Tee Higgins.
The Bengals ran one tight end sets most in the NFL last year. Their defense doesn't look like it'll be improving much. So I'm with you guys. I do think it is a decent landing spot. Zach Taylor came out and said Higgins could potentially be a starter. He also said that last year he felt like the receivers were taking way too many reps. He was saying they don't need to all play 60 plays per game. So he wants to decrease some of that wide receiver workload if possible. So I really do think Higgins could find some decent volume here. But the question is, would you draft the Bengals wide receiver 3 or 4 next year? Probably not. If we see some big potential, maybe Ross and Green go down, why not throw 25%, 50% of your fab on them, depending on how Joe Burrow's looking? Just grab that upside. Any losers for the Bengals here? If I had to pick one, it'd probably be Auden Tate.
Yeah, I mean, Auden Tate's barely going to see the field. Maybe John Ross. I could see Higgins and Ross kind of competing for snaps there. There's a lot of guys on this list where if you're looking at redraft specifically, you might have your wide receiver 5, on draft day. You're looking at guys like Danny Amendola. And for me, I would rather, Mike, you made a great point. You could probably wait to get some of these guys we're going to talk about today on waivers. Like I remember last year, A.J. Brown was bouncing on and off of waivers for the first 8 weeks of the season. So you could probably wait for some of these guys. But if you're looking at like a wide receiver 5 and a Danny Amendola type, Cole Beasley type slot guy, I still think I might rather take a shot on one of these guys who could actually take a step forward. And if an injury happens or if they just happen to fight for snaps on the field and get on the field, they could end up being top guys like we saw from DK Metcalf, A.J. Brown, Deebo Samuel last year. So for like an upside, I'm definitely taking a Tee Higgins and some of these other guys we'll talk about later in the show. But I think the biggest losers here are just obvious. It's got to be Auden Tate and it's got to be John Ross.
And John Ross declined his 5th-year option. As of right now, no long-term deal is in place with A.J. Green, though rumors are there that with Andy Dalton walking away, they will have some cap space for Green. But, Mike, I want to touch on one point. Something you talk about a lot is appreciating assets in Dynasty. And, I could see Higgins as a guy that have almost no fantasy significance in 2020, but still see a huge increase to his value. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, so rookie wide receivers, I mean, typically they hold a decent amount of value unless they totally fall flat in their face. Like if you pull like a N'Keal Harry, for example. But like for
Yikes.
someone like Tee Higgins, the thing is like you can create a very easy narrative to make him a buy next year, right? Like if AJ Green leaves, then you know the alpha wide receiver role gets vacated. If Joe Burrow takes another step forward, like all these types of things start compounding, and that's what drives value. And that's why I think he's one of the guys that I'm willing to fire on. He doesn't cost you a first, right? It costs you like a second round pick, and I think that's a pretty good place to fire over on him versus someone like one of these backup running backs.